Hello and welcome to the First Brick Property Podcast, episode 22. My name is Cayman. I'm the director of the First Brick Property Buyers Agency. The purpose of this podcast is to bring a casual style show to discuss all things property, with education being the key. Beginners, whether you're a beginner or a seasoned investor, this show will be able to further your knowledge and really remove any barriers into getting involved in the exciting and fun world of property. Now, if you're watching this show on YouTube, if you're watching the video, you'll very quickly notice it's a different setting, and I'm on my own today. My regular co-host, Hanny, our schedules have been very conflicting for the last week or so, so it was hard to get him on when I was available as well. So I thought instead of waiting, I'll just tackle this podcast on my own. It's been a little while since I've done my own, been on by myself. Actually, it's been, I guess, 21 weeks. The only other time was episode 1. So hopefully I'll keep it fresh and fun and try and get my tones going up and down to keep it interesting. But we'll see how we can go. I think today's episode is a very, very interesting episode, and it's going to bring a nice insight into the world of property and data and how to find the perfect spots for your investment property, and really we're giving out our secrets on how we do it and what we're looking for as well. So I guess we'll get stuck into it. I've got no one to ask about how their day was or how their week was, so we'll just get straight into it. So what we'll discuss today is certain crucial things to look for when picking an investment property. So we know that location does 80% of the heavy lifting, right? If you get your location right, most likely your property will succeed in terms of gaining capital growth and increasing in value, and you'll have equity that can be released and help you purchase the next one and the one after. But if location does 80% of the heavy lifting, how do we find the perfect location? Is it simply closest to the CBD wins, or closest to the beach wins? How does it work? And a lot of the times, proximity to CBD or beach is important for jobs, for lifestyle factors as well. When we working with a client, we're looking at over 50 different metric points, different factors per suburb, well over 50, to really find that perfect sweet spot. And obviously, depending on your budget, we're going to have different findings. So if we have $500,000 and we're buying in Sydney, we're not going to be able to buy in Bondi. It's just too far away. In terms of price point, we're not even close. Whereas if we're $500,000 price point, we're in Brisbane, we might be really close to the city, or quite close to the CBD and to the river, which is something that's very important in Brisbane. But before we get into the actual data points, it's very important to know that every city has their own characteristics and their own features. For example, like we just mentioned in Brisbane, people in Brisbane would rather you want to be closer to the river that runs through the center of Brisbane. If you've never seen a map of Brisbane, just Google map it and you'll see this nice long river that runs through. The river in Brisbane is more of a draw card than the beach, for example. Whereas in Sydney, obviously the beach and the city is where it's all happening, I guess, where in terms of population and mass movement of people. So and it's probably due to the dynamics of how the city is built as well. But every city has its own unique characteristics and features. So it's very important that you don't take a Sydney mindset going into Melbourne, or a Melbourne mindset going into Adelaide going into Perth, for example. Every city has their own niche and their own tricks and their own characters, its own personality. And you have to be well aware of that. So that's the fundamentals and the underlying knowledge that you need to know and grasp about the town, about the area, before looking at the numbers. Because numbers alone, they are great. We love our data, and most of our decisions are data backed. However, there's always an underlying underlying factor and underlying fundamental behind those numbers that direct us into where we want to be purchasing. So there's something behind the numbers as well. As we go through, so I'm going to go through 8 factors that I personally use when working for a client on assessing the strength of a suburb. And everything really surrounds, I guess, supply versus demand. Because as we know, supply versus demand is pretty much how economics runs the entire world. So for a nice quick example, if I sell ice cream and, today I go to the beach and I have 100 ice cream cones and I sell them for 50 cents each and I sell out, beautiful, made $50. Tomorrow I go to the beach, I take 100 ice creams and I, increase the price by 50 cents. I sell it for $1. I sell out, so I've made $100. I've doubled my money. So I keep increasing my price by $1, by $1, by $1. And I keep selling out. And one day there's no one buying my ice cream. Now, it could be one or two reasons. One, and a good chance it could be, I'm charging too much for ice cream. Or two, nobody wants ice cream anymore. Or there's too many ice cream suppliers. Other people have seen my business grow, my ice cream business, and set up their own ice cream businesses. And now there's many options as to where you can get your ice cream from, and the same amount of people buying that ice cream. So now we've got 500 ice creams for sale and only 100 people buying. You're going to have less demand, which means your prices either need to go back down or will be pushed down to compensate. Just a very little example. Obviously, the property industry is a bit different and more complex because, many dwellings, millions of dwellings, and no two dwellings are the same. Even if it's a townhouse or a duplex, a duplex is literally sometimes the same building, same design, same everything, but one might have more access to sun than the other. One might be closer to the curb, to the roundabout or to the traffic light than the other in terms of parking, and it might be harder to get in or out, whatever it is. There's always slight differences. So it's not very straightforward in terms of, 100 ice creams, 100 buyers, 1-to-1. So there's a lot of factors, and we'll go through them now. And these 8 factors, if you can really grasp these 8 factors, like I said, we use over 50 factors per suburb, but we'd be here for a long time going through all of them. We're going to go through 8 crucial factors. And it's important that you don't take one of these factors on their own and make a decision based on that. And again, this is just general advice. We definitely urge you to use a buyer's agent or speak to a professional and get professional advice before anything. But it's crucial to take these factors together. So I'll go through these 8 factors, and I'm going to use my home suburb where I live to show you what the data looks like for that suburb, so you can get an idea. So the first one, we'll get stuck into it. First data point that we look at that can really help you identify the strength of a suburb is auction clearance rates. So auction clearance rates, they're measured at the end of the weekend. They see, there was how many properties went for auction, how many properties sold, and what is that as a percentage. Okay, so we know recently due to COVID, there has been a lack of auctions. So sometimes that metric isn't 100% and can't be used. For example, in this period of time, because the auction numbers are so low, the percentages can be very varied. And for example, if you're in a suburb or a state or a city that doesn't use auctions a lot, for example, Sydney and Melbourne, auctions are very, very common, very go-to. But outside of Sydney and Melbourne, auctions are not the preferred method. So that metric point might not be 100% or might not be as influential in other cities or states. But let's look at my home suburb, auction clearance rates. We want our auction clearance rates to be higher. The higher the number, the better. It means that there is more demand. Now, before I keep going, a lot of people might be thinking, well, if the lower the number and we're having the negative side of all of these 8 factors means we can pick up a bargain. That's what a lot of people think. Now, you probably can pick up a bargain in, inverted commas. Problem is, if all the data is pointing the other way, there's probably a reason for it, which means there's no demand. Now, you may get into a suburb and buy a property in a suburb that's not very good, and all the data is pointing the other way. You might get a 50 grand, 100 grand off what the fair value, let's call it fair value, was, but it's going to sit there and it's not going to move up because there's nothing driving it to go up, because you bought into this suburb that all the numbers are pointing the other way to get your theoretical bargain. It's either going to stay where you bought it for, or it might go even lower. So take that into account. We're always looking at supply versus demand. So we're looking at suburbs that are going to be hard to get into. They're going to be sought after because those are the suburbs that have emotional value, emotional intrinsic value for people that want to live there, and those are the people that are going to push the prices up. We spoke about it in another episode. If you remember, we said property investors are price takers and owner occupiers are price makers. So the people that live in an area, they're the ones that make the price. They choose because they're paying an emotional value. Whereas when you're an investor, you're taking that price. You take whatever the price, the market price is, and we're not really influencing because we're obviously thinking with our calculators. So we'll go back to that first point, auction clearance rate. So the higher the clearance rate, it means there's more demand in that suburb. Things are getting sold off. So for the last few months, disregard the 1 or 2 months that we had no auctions, the suburb where I live in has had 100% auction clearance rate. So every single property that went to auction was sold. And it's been at 100% for about 5 months straight, disregarding those couple months where there was no auctions at all. So that is a really good factor. So the higher the auction clearance rate, the more demand in that suburb. So that's the first factor. We'll go on to the second one. Second one is days on market. So when we're talking about days on market, we're looking at how many days is a property in a certain suburb on the market for. Okay, so if I put up my house today and it takes me 365 days to sell, the days on market would be 1 year or 365 days. And that's quite slow. Whereas if we have a property in another suburb and it takes 10 days to sell only, we know that there's high demand there because it's selling quickly, or there could be low supply, or it could be a combination of the both. So days on market, the lower your days on market, the better, because as you can see, less supply, more demand, things are getting snapped up quickly, which means that intrinsically there's more demand than supply, and the property prices will be pushed up. So you want to find suburbs that have a lower days on market. Again, like I said, all these factors you're going to be seeing, we're looking for what you may be thinking, that doesn't make sense. We want the opposite. We want to find something that's been on the market for a long time so you can get a bargain. But again, you may get that theoretical bargain, but you might not be getting any intrinsic value out of it. So again, the suburb where I live in, the days on market for the last 12 months, the average has been about 48 days, which isn't slow. It's not quick, pretty average. The next thing we're going to look at, and this is a big one, is stock on market. And we look at this as a percentage. And what do we mean by stock on market? So if there are 10 houses in a suburb and one of them is for sale, you have a 10% stock on market. Okay, so we're looking at how many properties in a suburb are for sale during the year as a percentage. The lower this number is, the better. And let me explain that. So if you have a low percentage of stock on market, it means that the area is very tightly held. So if we have 100 properties in a suburb and only one is being sold every year, it is a very, very small percentage. That's 1% of properties in an area being sold per year. That means the other 99 properties in that area are not being sold, they're being held. So for you to get into that market, you're going to be paying top dollar. You're going to be fighting a lot of other people that want to get into that market because the supply is never there. Stock on market is just a simple supply number. It's all about supply. So the lower the better, because there's more people fighting for a smaller amount of properties, which is going to push that price up. So what's a good stock on market number? Anything less than 1% is a really, really good number. Really good. So we're saying less than 1% of properties in a certain market are going for sale per year. That is a fantastic number. Anything above 3% is too high. Essentially, it's saying more than 3% of people are selling their properties in this area per year. Well, if I don't like this one, I'll get the next one. If I don't like that one, I'll get the one after. And there could be quite a few properties for sale in the same suburb at the same time, around the same price point, very similar features. I don't need to fight too many people to get into this market. And if I don't need to fight too many people to get into this market, I'm not obviously paying more money. I'm going to be paying less money. And if not less money, it might be even lower than value because there's so many properties on the market. There's so much supply. There's a lot less demand as well. So it might not be less demand, but if you have so much more supply, it evens out. But often you find you're having less demand as well. So it brings the property prices down. Between 1 and 3% is kind of, it's very average. But you want to be really looking for those property markets that have less than 1% stock on market. So we'll go back again to my home suburb. Currently in the last 12 months, 0.7% stock on market. So as you can see, it's quite a tightly held market. Not too many properties up for sale during the year as a percentage, and that keeps property prices hot, keeps them, at fair value always, and if not, selling higher. Now, the next one we're going to look at is the renters versus owner-occupiers split. We've spoken about this before on a few podcasts, on a few episodes, and what we're looking for here is to find a renter ratio around the 30% mark. So we want a market that has around 30% renters or investors and 70% owner-occupiers. And why that is, owner-occupiers, as we said, they're price makers. So the more owner-occupiers in the area, they're going to be pushing that price up, the value of your home up. They're going to be pushing the price of the market up. And if you've got 70% investors or renters, for example, there's very small amount of people that actually buying to live there. And that could be that's a sign of low demand. So we're always looking for either supply or demand factor. So when we're looking at the owner occupiers, we know that 70% of property purchases are owner occupier owned. So we want that ratio. We want that 70% in the market that we're buying our property, our investment property in as well, because they're going to be putting money back into the community. They're going to be spending at the local cafes. They're going to be increasing the economy of the local area, which is going to increase the reputation of the area, the status of the area. We spoke about gentrification before. These are the people that gentrify the area. They put the money back in. They want to see their suburb grow. They want to see their suburb be beautiful. They want to see their suburb increase in value because they live there, so they care. And because they're holding that much of the market in that area, they hold the supply. Whereas only 30% are essentially investors. So you want to be looking for that split. If you're getting an 80-20 in terms of owner-occupiers, that's still okay. You don't want it to be too high because then you can't get your tenants in. There's no renters in the area. And on the flip side, if you have 80% investors or renters, again, there's obviously way too much supply, or there's very little demand for people to buy to live there. So the market where I live in, it's actually spot on right on 30%. So that's very, very nice, clean number, 30% there. So that's the 1, 2, 3, fourth factor we look at. We'll look at the fifth factor here, and this one's an interesting one. It's called online search interest. So essentially, it's in the name. We're looking at how many people have searched for this property market online. Realestate.com, domain, Google Maps, whatever it is. How many people are looking at this certain suburb, and how many people are looking to buy into a certain suburb per month? Or it could just be that they're interested in the suburb. Now, the higher this number, obviously, the better, because you have more demand. If we have 1 million people looking into one suburb in Sydney, for example, or Melbourne or wherever it is, that's a lot of people looking and interested in a certain suburb. So there's a lot of demand there, and that's going to outweigh the supply always if you have that many people looking into an area. So it shows a sign of demand. It shows a sign of interest from owner-occupiers, from renters, from a lot of things. So this factor on its own is very crucial, is not looked at alone, because you can have an area that is in the numbers get kept propped up. If real estate and domain, they always, I think monthly or weekly, they put up like a property that's really cool or some cool story, and a lot of people click it. It really sways the data because people aren't really interested in the area. They're just clicking on a story and looking at what happened. Or, a lot of the high net worth areas or big houses and mansions and whatnot, they get a lot of hits because there's a lot of people that are looking at their dream homes or looking at how, like, just, looking forward forecasting their lives, I guess. But it's not an accurate representation. But this, along with the other 7 factors, can tell the story. We're looking for the supply versus demand story. So a higher online search interest is better. So the suburb I live in has had in the last month 1,250 people or search interests for the month. So that is considered pretty high. It's good. There's higher, obviously, and there's much lower. So you definitely want to be looking for areas that have higher search interest, because that is your demand. Moving on to 4, 5. Point number 6 is average vendor discount. So average vendor discount is essentially the difference between the price that a property is advertised for and the price that property is sold as a percentage. So for example, if I put up my house for $400,000 and someone buys it for $380,000, that's a $20,000 difference. That's a $20,000 discount. As a percentage, that's about 5%. So when we're looking at this data point, we are looking at the overall discount that people are getting in certain suburbs. So the lower this number, that means the lower the discount is, buyers are not being able to negotiate. Sellers are getting what they want. So if sellers are getting what they want, it tells us that there is a higher demand in the area. If there is a huge discount across, and these numbers, this is across the entire market, so there can be outliers and it's not going to affect the numbers. So if you have an overall high number, say 15-20% discount, which is huge, you know that there's either way too much supply or no demand at all. There could be 10 houses for sale and only 1 person buying in that area. That person has a lot of power because they can pick and choose and they can pay what they want, and 10 people are trying to get rid of their properties. So the lower the number, the more tightly held the market, that property market is, and the more demand and less supply in that area. So you want to be looking for areas that have a lower vendor discount figure. So if we look at the suburb where I live in at the moment, its current vendor discount number is 4.8%. So just under that 20 grand, 15 grand, depends on obviously the purchase price, but as a percentage, that's not high and it's not low. It's an average discount that you'll see if you're looking at multiple property markets. But you just want to be looking for markets that have a lower vendor discount. The next one we'll look at, point number 7, is the gross rental yield. So the yield, we've done a couple of videos on this, and if you're not sure what a yield is, essentially it is what rent you are getting as a percentage of the property price. So how you work it out is whatever the weekly rent is, you times that by 52, so you get the yearly rent, divide that by the purchase price, and then you get your percentage, times that by 100, and you get your yield as a percentage. Now, do you want a high yield? Do you want a low yield? This factor alone just is a factor of cash flow. All it is telling you is cash flow. Combine it with 7 other factors and you're getting a bit of a story. So what's a good yield? different markets have different yields, right? You can go into a mining town, you can get 10, 11, 12% yields, which means you're getting a lot of rent in comparison to the purchase price, which means you're going to be highly positively geared. You're going to have great cash flow. In return, you may lose a lot of capital growth. On the flip side, you may look at Sydney, for example, where the average yield at the moment is 2 to 3%, which means you're probably most likely going to be negatively geared because your rent is such a low proportion of the purchase price. But in return, you might be looking at 6, 7, 8% growth. Yield on its own, as I said, is just a measure of cash flow. So you really need to combine this with your strategy and with the market you're in. Okay, so Sydney, you're averaging 2 to 3% yields. Melbourne, you're getting a little bit higher, 3.5 to 4. Maybe in Brisbane and Adelaide, you're getting 4 to 6s, whatnot. On its own, it's just a story of cash flow. Combine that with the other factors, and you can get a story of supply and demand. How many people want to be in that area that they're pushing the rents up, for example, or they're pushing the rents down because no one wants to be in that area. So take it as a cash flow data point, but combine it with the other 7 and you can get a story. So where I live at the moment, we're getting 3.5% rental yields, which is, just maybe a little bit above average for Sydney. Now, point number 8 is vacancy rates. This is a huge, huge, huge point. Vacancy rate is a factor that shows how vacant an area is, essentially. So if we have, again, 100 properties and 0 of them are 100 properties for rent and 0 of them are rented, you have a 100% vacancy rate So the vacancy rate is showing you how many people are renting the properties that are for rent. So the lower that number, it means the less vacancies there are. It means when there's a property for rent, it's getting snapped up. People want to rent there. People want to be in that area, which is a sign of supply and demand. Because if you have way too much supply and there's a lot of people that want to be in there, but there's still heaps of supply, that vacancy rate number is going to increase because you have a lot of choice. Now, if you have a lot of people that want to be in that area and you have very little properties that are available for rent, that number is going to be very, very small because it's tightly held. And if you can get in, you're getting in, and you're probably paying a high rent as well, which is going to push your yields up. If you have a lot of places and if you have a lot of people that want to be in the area and a lot of people that want to rent in the area, and you can see that vacancy rate is low, you also can see that you're not going to be holding that property for long until it gets tenanted. You're not going to buy it and have it held for 18 weeks or 6 months, whatever it is, and not have a tenant. You're going to put it up and within a week or 2, you're going to have your tenant ready going. Okay, so vacancy rate, the lower the number, it shows more people want to rent there and there's not enough rental properties in the area, essentially. So the lower the better there. So in our situation where we live, the current vacancy rate is 0.5%. Now, we've gone through not the 8 factors, but we've gone through 8 factors that I personally use when assessing the strength of a suburb. Now, like I said, on its own, each factor means very little. Together, you can create a story of supply and demand, and you can understand the needs for certain areas. So combine the 8 points together, and you'll find out you'll find out a good idea of the supply versus demand story. Like I said, we look at 50 other factors usually, and these are just 8 factors. But these are 8 factors that if you can really understand and figure out, you can understand the story of a suburb and the strength of that suburb. Okay, so hopefully I've given you some secrets and some tips and tricks. If you're trying to find these 8 and you're finding it really difficult, or you're thinking, okay, well, I've got these 8, but what does it mean? Or I've got another 50, factors that you haven't told me about. Why not? Feel free to come to us, talk to us. Happy to help, and we're always, happy to see other people succeed and grow their property portfolios by making correct decisions. So very crucial that you put these 8 factors together. So that brings us to the end of our episode today. Thank you for listening. Hopefully, I wasn't too boring or didn't stutter too much on my own. And if you like this podcast, please give us a like, follow, subscribe, whatever platform you're using. We're on almost every single, I think we're on every single podcast player platform there is. You'll find us. Give us a like and subscribe, and give us a comment. These comments really help our podcast get up in the charts. That's how the algorithms work. The more comments, the more people following, the more listens we get, the more it shows up on other people's, and we can keep growing and growing. And obviously we want to grow our podcast so more people can hear about it, and we want to build something big here, something great. So if you're listening with us at the moment, you're on the start of our journey. You're here with us now. You can be part of something big. Give us that like, follow, and also give us a comment. Pass the pod. Just tell one person. We're having a good amount of listeners. If each person just told one person, we'd be doubling and we're quadrupling and compound interest, and we'd be a big. We'd have a lot of people listening to our podcast. It'd be awesome. If you're looking for any of our content, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. All our content is there. We post almost daily, if not daily. So find us there, and you can, follow us as well on our socials. Thank you for listening in. We'll wrap it up there. And if you have any questions or topics, send them in to hello@firstbrick.com.au, or find us on our socials and send us a DM. But yeah, we'll see you guys next week. Buying property is our passion. Helping you do it is our mission. See ya.